Thank you. It's such a pleasure and honor to be here. My name is Eva Taylor and I am with Hootsuite. And I believe we're going to start today by showing the video for one of our first women heroes that we're honoring this year, Marjan Neshat.
There's so much about believing in yourself and believing that you can do it your own way. I think when you're younger, you're just more afraid to do that because it's just not as proven. But I think when you're around for a while and you try different things and then you're like, oh, well, this is my one life. I gotta be able to be proud of my work. And, you know, what does that mean?
Hi, I'm Marjan Neshat, and I'm an actress. I'm doing the unexpected by playing Sandra. There's not a lot of quote-unquote Middle Eastern actors who would be playing a woman named Sandra Jones. I remember a friend of mine when I got this play was like, oh, well, maybe if they've cast you, they'll change the name from Sandra to something more Middle Eastern. And I was like, I didn't go to acting school to play myself. I was born in Iran, and at the time, the revolution was happening and everything changed. And the revolution turned into a coup. And one day, my sister was walking us down the street and this van pulled up. And they were like yelling at her that this thing called a manto, like an overcoat basically, wasn't buttoned enough and her scarf wasn't forward enough. And I thought they were gonna take her. And I just started screaming my head off. And after that, I think we came to Seattle. My sister's a doctor, like all good Iranian girls. I mean, I think that she would have pursued medicine and that it was her thing, but I think she also didn't feel like she had the room to rebel in any way or have that time for self-discovery, because I think there is this pressure of like, you get this opportunity, you better do something with it. You know, whereas I think when I came, I was much younger and, you know, I had parents who were immigrants who were afraid of everything. So I was on the outside. I just constantly felt like I'm other. And I started to audition for plays. And I did my first play when I was 14. And it was the first experience I'd ever had of not being on the outside. It was like my first experience of not feeling lonely. The first time I told my mom, she was like, people in our family don't do this. But I pursued it so doggedly. And I was like, I'm doing this. And ultimately, they became very supportive of me.
I was about to have my first public reading in New York at Ensemble Studio Theater. And I was hesitant, but partly because this part, Afia, who's the lead character in the play, in a lot of ways, like spiritually, all of these women like are the women in my family. And I was just so nervous, like who was the person that was gonna come in and be able to like deliver this part? And then Marjan read it. And I just remember this like welling up of emotion, because I think there was a recognition that in her I had really found a creative partner, someone that knew who these women were and that challenged a lot of our, I think, stereotypical notions of what women from the Middle East or Southeast Asia are like. And she's just phenomenal. So from that point on, like, I just try to work with Marjan whenever I can.
Sylvia does not suffer fools. I think, especially as a young woman, I think you tend to be pushed around by a lot of people with power saying, well, you should do this, or if you really want to succeed, you got to do this. And she sticks to her guns in a way I've never, ever seen. It is remarkable. For a long time, when I started out, there was this thing of like, well, we'll save you for the Middle Eastern part. And a lot of times, what the Middle Eastern parts were tasked with is to give a lesson and not be a fully dynamic, complicated, raunchy, funny human being.
Like, it's sad to even say it, but sometimes you have to remind people that these women exist. I think we have these ideas of like what women in the Middle East and Southeast Asia are, which is like demure or retreating, and it's just the opposite is true. They're strong women holding their own and often taking care of all the people around them.
If you show people in one light all the time, people assume that's what they are. And like, you have to give people examples of how they can be anything, because that's what they need to do in order to grow.
And I think that's what you get when you welcome people to the table with a multitude of different experiences, is you have those stories treated with care and with respect so that they don't become maudlin, melodramatic. They just stay practical I say this a lot. I think that theater is the place that we go to examine ourselves and for society to examine itself. And what does it mean if what we're seeing on stage doesn't reflect society? Like, then we have a big problem.
Obviously, there needs to be breakthroughs. It can't just be that every time you do a play about a family, it's a white family with 3 blonde women. That is not the fabric of what we look like. Part of breaking the rules, like really helping people develop and understand what their role is and could be. Like, if there's room to do it differently, I think we have to support and empower that. Go out and meet more people and connect with more people and take more risks and work harder. I'm honored to be part of World Woman Hour. If in any way I can be a small part of helping anyone else or making the world slightly better, I couldn't ask for something more meaningful or important.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Marjan, so much for sitting down with me today to talk about breaking the role and, in particular, helping to lead freedom for women.
It's my pleasure to be here.
Thank you. And, congratulations on being one of the women nominated in this year's World Woman Hour. I think your story is such a fantastic example of how you're challenging stereotypes through your work, and you're bringing such depth and light and awareness through the roles that you're playing where Middle Eastern women may otherwise be typecast. So I'd love to start our conversation by talking a bit about how the roles you've been playing, such as Sandra, might be helping to challenge some of the typical notions there may be around Middle Eastern women in the roles that they might be typically cast in.
I feel like I addressed it somewhat, but I feel like when I went to school to learn how to play anything. That's kind of, you go to drama school to do that. And I had a really incredible and fortunate year last year where I did 4 overlapping plays. Mm-hmm. And it started out with Sylvia's play, Selling Kabul, and I did 2 plays written by this amazing woman named Sanaz Tusi, and they both took place in Iran. And Sandra was a one-woman show that took place in America about this woman, Sandra Jones. And I feel like it was very interesting because none of those roles necessarily led up to that. And in Sandra, I was tasked with playing a 70-year-old gay Southern man and my 33-year-old Italian lover. It was so many things. And I feel like, in a way, it felt like I had broken through this wall of only being seen as a Middle Eastern actor. But I also feel, and this has always been really important to me, that I love where I'm from and I'm really proud of it. And the way that the programming of these playwrights allowed Middle Eastern women to be seen in their own light. Mm-hmm. Selling Kabul wasn't accented, it wasn't otherized. I feel like people tend to say, there was an amazing quote that someone wrote on Twitter being like, we people in the Middle East aren't, like, we don't come into the world thinking we should suffer and that we are like your drama porn in a way. And I feel like so often people just disassociate when you put them in an accent, when you put them behind a veil, when you assume that their stories are not like yours, mm-hmm. then I think that you can distance yourself, and you can distance yourself from their stories. And the playwright of Sandra said that he came to see Wish You Were Here, which was a story essentially about female friendship. They also didn't have accents. They were really, really raunchy. I think two of us got our periods on stage and like grabbed it was a love story between friends, really, but the backdrop of it was the Iranian Revolution. And he was like, seeing you in that play made me want to see you alone on stage in Sandra. Mm. And that things are interconnected in a way that I think if we open our minds to how people really can be anything, mm-hmm. Then you don't have to put them in their corners.
Yeah, I love that. It's so clear how you're really carving out this path for yourself in the world and offering a path that so many others can take inspiration from. And of course, on this journey, as you're carving this out, your family is there, and you mentioned your parents and your sister, the doctor. And I'd love to know a little bit more about how their response has been over the years of your career and as you've been taking on new and different challenges in that.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely changed. When I first told my mom, she was like,
have you heard of Marilyn Monroe? And I was like, there's like this assumption that like, basically if you go into acting, you're going to be like die of a drug overdose. And like there was such a fear coming, I think, from Iran and being an immigrant family. There was both this expectation that if you have all this opportunity, that you have to really do something with it, and what does that look like? But I think that as I sort of pursued it so wholeheartedly, and I would like waitress to pay for classes, I think when I was like 16, that they knew that, and they really begged me to have something to fall back on, and I was like, nope. And so I think I think even partly like auditioning for all these schools and getting into all of them, I think there was an eye-opener for them to say like, oh, there's something in you that we don't necessarily understand or recognize because it's not what we've had an experience to explore in ourselves. Mm-hmm. And I think that really made them come on board. And my sister also was like, just let her do what she wants. I'm going to be a doctor. I'll help her out, I wanted to say something that in regards to your first question, which I think bears mentioning, that, there is I think representation really matters. And I think that people really need to be able to see examples of what they dream about in their world with people that look like them or people that they connect to. Mm-hmm. But I really think it's also important to note that representation means something really different for everyone. Mm-hmm. The last panel I did, and I was like, Rupa, you're so funny. And she was like, that there's so many things that we do that we kind of come into this world and people assume you're this thing. And I think, in terms of Sandra, like I was representing myself. It felt very genuine to me, but it's not what people would assume I represent. Mm-hmm. And I think for some people, they don't necessarily want to play parts. Like I have Middle Eastern friends or African American friends who are like, I wouldn't want to play a part that isn't me. Mm. And I think that there's variety in that.
I love that, and it makes me think a bit about, friends and family back in Iran. Has your work been able to spark conversations about maybe the ways that they perceive women in the Middle East being portrayed?
Well, it's part of why I don't think I can go back to Iran. I think I'm on a list, and I think that within the Iranian diaspora, I think, and I have friends and family in England and here, I think that it's been really moving to them in some of my work to be like, oh, people are now telling our stories. Like when I did Wish You Were Here, there were so many mothers and daughters that came. They're like, we've never seen ourselves on an American stage before. And that's been really powerful. But I think that people, at its core, the Iranian culture is so deeply loving that I think they cheerlead me from afar without really knowing the work that I'm doing, because it doesn't really, none of it can reach.
Yeah. And, I think one of the things that I really loved about your story in particular is that you spoke about how this is really your one life that you're living and making the most of it, and the need to believe in yourself and to do things your own way, which I'm sure resonates for so many of us today. And not only are you using your voice through your work and your roles on stage and on screen, but you're speaking up for the women in Iran and their rights. And I think, as we're all very aware, the very tragic and devastating death of Mahsa Amini, a 22-year-old Iranian woman, in September of 2022, has led to some of the largest protests we've seen in Iran in the past decade. And you yourself and your sister had what I'm sure was a quite terrifying experience interacting with the morality police in Iran before moving to the US at a young age. And so I'd love to talk about how you are taking action to support the women and the men who are calling for change and equality in Iran.
Thank you. I mean, it's hugely meaningful to me to be able to talk about it. And the ask from Iran from the beginning, every time there's been an uprising and there's been protests, the Iranian government basically cuts off the internet and kills people with impunity. That it's happened, and that's how they crush these revolutions. And I feel like this time they have not been able to do that, and part of that has been the ask has been over and over to amplify their voices. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, through for whatever following I have, that what I've been trying to do more than anything is to share their stories and talk to anyone who wants to hear about it. But to just, even though it's sad and hard that to continue to support them by sharing their stories and to amplifying their voices. And then, you know, there's like petitions, and there's a lot of things we could, if we had time, I could talk about it forever. But one of the main things of support has been to do that.
Yeah, and I think despite the Iranian government's attempts to block and control social media, what we're seeing with this recent round of protests is it's more widespread than ever on social media, and we have some examples here behind us, including one of your posts, and I just absolutely adore how Christian Serrano created this dress as well at the Oscars, and the many ways the message is getting out. It's so powerful to see it in real life and first-hand experiences. I can only imagine that you're feeling a lot of emotions when you're seeing girls and women dancing in the streets in Iran and baring their hair. I think managing the emotions it's a task, I'm sure, on its own, let alone seeing what's happening. But
I mean, it's the first female-led revolution of our time. And, you know, when I was a kid in Iran, I was told every day in class, they're like, the number of hairs you're going to show a man that is not your brother and your father is the number of hairs you're going to hang by in hell and burn. That was like my daily like teaching at school. And to see these young girls like holding hands with showing their hair and like screaming the headmaster out of school, it is both like I am both terrified for them, and my heart is like so full with the courage that these girls have. And I feel like, you know, even just like hearing that gasp, it is like when you know the world, when you get to know people's stories, it's hard to then shut off your eye and like what that took for that young girl to take their headscarf off.
Yeah, and I think you even mentioned that in the video with the playwright, like this idea of women from the Middle East being perceived as demure. I haven't seen like that level of courage and bravery. It just moves me every time I see any of those firsthand stories. And it does feel like social media is really helping to maybe make waves with this particular protest. How do you feel it's playing a role maybe in how Iranians are able to bring more awareness to what's happening in Iran?
I just think they can't hide it. You know, you can't, they've jailed and killed and, you know, they've done so much and it's out there. So they can't say, no, this is just pretend, or it was just a really small gathering. There's videos of like thousands of people in the street and people striking. So I just think they can't hide.
Yeah.
And so there's a groundswell of support.
And that does kind of, I do want to circle back to what you were talking about a bit before, and before we wrap up our conversation, is a bit about the individual actions that we can take, which I think is always important to discuss. The way that Iranians are sharing what's happening at the ground level on social media, and the ways that they're working around some of the blocks through virtual private networks and things. They're obviously posting at great personal risk to themselves and their family. And so for those of us who are outside of Iran, what are some of the ways that we can help rise up to their calls for action around women, life, and freedom? And maybe what are some of the things that we should keep in mind as we're amplifying voices on social media?
You know, I mean, there's sort of vetted like people to follow, but also to continue to share and amplify. There's also a petition that if it comes your way to sign and share, there's a petition going around to try and legally enshrine gender apartheid and to name the Islamic Republic and the Taliban as gender apartheid regimes. And just, you know, the international community has to kind of support and step up. Not for them to like decide who runs that country, but to support them in their fight.
Yeah.
And I think that social media is a big way that people share those stories.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today about these really important issues. And I'd like to invite Regina to come back and join us on stage.
Thank you so much.
Foundation, we'd like to present you, Marjan Neshat, with the 2023 World Women Honoree Award.
Thank you very much. Thank you.